Welcome to Workplace and Mental Health Hypothetical, presented by This Is My Brave Australia as part of the Creative Minds Gungahlin Mental Health Film and Arts Festival. Our panel for today are Josh Vaughan, Director of Catholic Care Canberra and Goulburn and Director of Youth Mental Health, Homelessness, Family and AOD Services. Martin Fisk, Chief Executive of Men's Link. Martin has served as the Chief Executive of Men's Link since 2011 after a 25-year career in both the private and public sectors, including nearly 10 years running his own business. Dr. Beck Jackson, Service Ambassador for Soldier On. Dr. Rebecca Jackson is the Principal Psychologist and Executive Leadership Coach for the Australian Army Senior Leadership Team, the Visiting Fellow in Strategic Leadership Development for the Australian War College, and Director of her own consulting psychology and coaching company based in Canberra, the Jackson Company Proprietary Limited. Member of the Legislative Assembly, Emma Davidson. Member for Murrumbidgee, Assistant Minister for Seniors, Veterans, Families and Community Services, Minister for Disability, Minister for Justice Health and Minister for Mental Health. Zebanissa Khan. Zebanissa is the Principal Psychologist at Lifestyle Psychology. Zebanissa has been working in the area of mental health for over 15 years in Sydney, South Coast and Canberra. Jane Grace has been a long-time consumer advocate involved with the ACT Mental Health Consumer Network, the ACT Consumer and Care and Mental Health Research Unit, the advisory group at the Australian National University, and is currently the ACT Consumer member on the National Mental Health Consumer Carer Forum. Dan Posh, Managing Director of Monero Windows. Monero Windows is a locally owned business providing exceptional quality products, employing local workers and supporting the Canberra community. He is also in the 2021 Men's AFL Canberra second grade best and fairest and leading goal kicker playing for the Belconnen Magpies. Our facilitator is Jen Siderhelm from Radio 2CA.
That's our panel for today, and our hypothetical today features Karen and her partner Michael. We'll start with Karen. Karen works for a government department. She's recently had a baby and she's married to Michael. Michael is in the army and has completed a tour of Afghanistan. Karen has recently returned to work after her maternity leave. Her mother takes care of the baby 2 days a week, and the other 3 days, the baby is in childcare. Her best friend in the department, Jane, notices that Karen is taking a lot of breaks. When asked if she's okay, Karen snaps, "I'm fine." Rather than join Jane, as she normally would do at lunchtime, Karen sits alone at her desk. I'll start the hypothetical with a question for Jane Grace. Jane, what should the other Jane do? And in a workplace, what can Jane do?
Well, I guess it depends if she is someone who's working at level or if she's someone who's got a supervisory role. Often our HR departments will say, oh, yes, go to employee assistance. But I think in a situation like this, particularly where you know someone's coming back from maternity leave, you should have an awareness of postnatal depression. It's also very difficult adjusting back to a full-time work role in the way that she is. It is basically full-time. She's got the children with her mum for 2 days, but childcare for 3. Even that is worrying. There might be some issues around maintaining the breastfeeding. So there's a lot of things going on. So as a supervisor, I think you've got to have some conversations about how things are going and be actually quite honest, but offer that there are supports and that, you know, maybe she needs to have some more flexible work options so that she doesn't feel she has to do a full day's work. You could have all kinds of different options, like going part-time or having compressed work hours, or doing, now since COVID, in my department, for example, the length of the day is from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So, I mean, there's lots of options that a workplace can do to allow someone to integrate back more easily. But I think if she's really starting to isolate and not having connections with her peers, that it is time to take action, because it's a sign that something's going wrong.
You're on mute.
That was a rookie mistake from me that time. I was having a lovely little chat away to myself then. In this post-lockdown environment, a lot of us will understand as we're transitioning back to going into the workplace and so on. And Karen had previously been very punctual, but she's now started to be 15 minutes or more late for work most days. A question for Dan Posh this time. How would you handle Karen's punctuality or lack of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And listening to what Jane just said, sort of the thing that jumps out at me is big difference between private business and government, where, you know, there's HR departments and professionals who deal with the staff. So in an organisation like mine, we're actually in a situation where we currently have two women returning in their own sort of time, I guess, to their pre-child hours and duties. So the main thing that I've found, and I guess with this situation, is it just comes down to talking to Karen, is it? Yep, sorry. Talking to Karen, and just really flexibility is the key, as Jane said. Just making sure that work isn't an added weight, I guess, for them to bear while they're dealing with. You don't need to know what they're dealing with. Everyone goes through quite an individual journey. Obviously, it can be a very tumultuous time. There can be things that nobody else knows that you're going through. So the main thing would be, from my point of view in that situation, just really emphasising that work can work around them. Family is most important. We're really looking forward to getting them back, and we're happy to facilitate that in the best way that we can for them. There's always ways around things. There's certain parts of people's jobs they can do remotely. Other parts we can have other people chip in to cover for them. But the main thing is that they just let us know what they need. They don't have to go into details with their issues or anything like that if they're not comfortable with it. But the main thing is just letting us know if they can't commit to the hours that they're currently on, or anything like that we're there and we can work with them on that.
Thanks, Dan. Karen has started to argue with other department members, ignoring directives, and a staff member talks to HR about it. And again, this is frequently something that happens with that external third person becoming part of the conversation as well. A question for Dr. Beck Jackson. Beck, at this stage, what action might you take?
So I guess this is something that I see quite a lot from both sides, because often in this scenario, I'm probably more likely to be working with Michael and hearing lots about Karen's situation. But the kinds of things that I would be having a look at is across the sort of the broader work environment, what kind of supports, what are the messages and the key themes that are discussed in and around the workplace. What are people's appetite to having these kinds of conversations around, workplace stress and the pressure that everybody kind of feels, not only those who are returning to work, but also those who are supporting them. And probably, I would probably be tackling it from a bit of a team approach as well, and making sure that maybe Karen's not being singled out specifically, but maybe looking at it as a good indicator that, hey, maybe it's a good time to do a little bit more sort of workplace mental health checking and wellbeing kind of messaging and advocacy in and around the workplace.
Yes, Josh.
I echo Beck. Thank you for your responses there too, and I guess just where I wanted to chime in here, I think it's really important to also acknowledge that exactly what this initiative is all about, and it's about discussing these really important issues based around stigma. But there is also, I think, in a workplace in particular, the real importance that there is a maintaining of a confidentiality and a privacy aspect too for what's happening in Karen's life. Obviously, it's her life, and she needs to feel supported that in the workplace, that she has the respect from her team, and if it is the supervisors who are supporting her around this too, that what she does share with them is her story. And there is obviously the balance where she needs to feel safe that what she is sharing is kept within the confines of where it should be and should be managed. So I think, Jen, if you've got the issue where there are other people who are now noticing there's a difference to Karen's role and her actions, that it is managed carefully and that the conversations are supported. And this is the bedrock of an organisation, whether, Dan, whether it's a private or a government organisation, it's really important that this bedrock of having a culture of support around the staff is developed early and maintained. And we're seeing lots of education around being trauma informed and about doing no harm, which is amazing, and it's what the sectors and the organisations need at this time. But I also wanted to highlight that's a big concern for us in our workplace around maintaining confidentiality and privacy, and that people are supported effectively.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Beck. Jane notices that Karen's in tears sometimes for what appears to her to be no reason. This is a question for Zeb and Issa Khan. Zeb, what do you think is happening with Karen, and how would you approach this conversation with Karen about her behaviour?
You're on mute.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Had to happen. Sorry, Jen, when you say, what would you say? What would I say as a person in the workplace to her? Or what would I?
As a psychologist in the first place, what do you think's going on with Karen?
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot going on with Karen right now. I think Jane said earlier, to come back to work after having a baby, I don't know, trauma is not such a bad word. When you try to talk about that, it can be very traumatic. It can be very daunting. So there's lots going on for Karen there. But I think you also mentioned that she's married to Michael, and Michael's recently come back from Afghanistan. So there's quite a bit going on there in that household as a unit. There's quite a bit of stress going on. And my first thing would be to echo what Beck has said, like what support is available to her. Is she just sort of going out on all of this all alone? And it's just coming up now that she's at work. And prior to that, it's just been, she's been battling it all on her own, and her and Michael have been trying to, make the best of whatever situation that they're in. So my first question is, what support do they actually have, if any, at all? When she's coming back to work and we're seeing that, she's late and she's, we're finding her in tears, that's kind of suggestive of things like postnatal depression or depression. There could be anxiety issues about coming back to work. It's a whole load of different things that could be going on. So after figuring out what sort of support she has, seeing how the workplace can actually support her, seeing what support is available to Michael. She might be Michael's only support. And if that's her role, if she's Michael's main support and Michael has said, for example, no, I'm not going to go and ask for any help. She's got Michael, she's got a new baby, and she's returning to work with possibly what I call a mushy mum brain after 12 months or so. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of pressure to have on a single human being. So first sort of, tapping into what's going on, seeing what support she has. It might even just be like an absolute cry for help. I mean, yes, she's got her defense mechanisms up and, she's maybe there's just that lot of pressure thinking, well, I have to do this and now I have to be at work and I have to excel at everything that I'm doing. When is someone going to cut me some slack?
Yep.
And in moments like that, whether it's a colleague and says, hey, just leave it, come to the kitchen, let's just sit and have a coffee. And just wait for Karen to actually open up. Like Josh says, privacy is really important. But once people feel that they're comfortable, they're more likely to open up, aren't they?
Yes, and that feeds into the second half of the question, and imagining it's your friend who's there. Let's say you've started the conversation and you've had the coffee sitting there, and they're still sitting in silence. What ways could you approach asking how Karen is?
Yeah. I think honesty is really good. So if it's a good friend, that good friend would be saying, hey, mate, I've just been noticing, you're not really yourself anymore. It's not like you to be coming to work late. I understand you just had a baby and all the rest of it, but, you just don't seem yourself, and I'm just really concerned. I'm here to help if I can help in some way. If it's just an ear that you need to listen to, I can be that ear for you. If you'd like me to go and speak to such and such supervisor, HR, whatever it might be, I can go with you. So just feeling like Karen's not on her own and she has to go up this big battle all on her own. I try to be as supportive as possible, not trying to solve her problems, right? Like that's not what we need to do as a good friend. We just need to kind of be there with them to help guide them through the scenario, not necessarily solving the problem. And I feel like that's why a lot of people struggle talking about mental health, because they feel like they need to have an answer. They need to have a fix-it of, I don't know what to say to him, so I'm just not going to say anything at all. Yeah. And it's not about having a solution. It's about making the person feel that they've actually been heard.
Thanks, Seb. Karen started to take the odd sick day here and there, whereas previously she never missed a day of work. Before her maternity leave, she was always well dressed and groomed. She now appears exhausted and often wears the same clothing for days at a time. I've put these questions out to Beck and to Dan, but I'm more than happy for others to answer this as well. Are these personal behaviours and external signs something that could be brought up at an informal personal appraisal, or is personal appraisal possibly the wrong words to choose when having that kind of discussion at a management level?
Can I? Sorry, I just I think if it was to come into a personal appraisal, that Karen would actually feel even more pressure and feel that her job was on the line and that it was some kind of performance appraisal process. So I'd want to actually keep it very separate from anything that looked like an appraisal. It would have to come as a human-to-human contact rather than a necessarily supervisor to employee contact. I mean, the supervisor does have a responsibility, but I think in this situation, a more gentle approach is important. And look, I can relate to what you've described there. I've done that. And it's awful and you're feeling really bad. So you don't want to have any more stress that your job's on the line.
I was gonna offer with a little bit of sort of empathy for Karen. I've got 4 kids, so I've returned 4 times to work, and I would say that a lot of what you're describing is probably quite typical of a mum trying to return to work and settle back into the workplace. So I think from a sort of a workplace point of view, whether it's a manager or colleague, particularly if you've got other female colleagues who have been through that experience as well, wrapping that support around them and just asking them how they're going, and not taking not taking the opportunity to overshare or share too much of your stuff, but just to try and normalise that experience for Karen as well, and particularly if it's her first baby, that's a massive shock to the system. And absolutely, there are indicators there that it might be more than just her struggling to sort of return to work, and cope with all of those different balls that she's now juggling. But I also think that normalising a lot of what she's experiencing and just having those really warm and empathic conversations in the workplace will make her feel much more likely to engage and then share in a way which is going to give you insight as to whether this is, more serious in her instance or not. But I would keep it away from it being anything that could be seen as additional judgment, because she's probably already been quite a harsh critic on herself, I think.
Yeah. Minister?
Yes, look, just echoing some of what Zeb and Beck and Jane have all talked about. What we're talking about here is having some really sensitive and sometimes can be really difficult conversations with someone that you really care about because you work with them every day. And so starting from a perspective of making sure that we're kind and caring and connected with one another and approaching it human to human is absolutely the right way to do it. So as an employer, the ACT government has responsibility for about 25,000 Canberrans as employees. And so making sure that we're doing things like providing mental health and wellbeing training from Lifeline and things like that can really help people to build their own understanding of mental health and wellbeing, and to have some empathy and understanding of what someone else might be going through if you need to sit down and have that conversation with someone that you're working with, and to also have a bit of knowledge about what sort of supports you could point them towards if they need to talk to someone in a more professional context or to get a little bit of extra help. The other things that we're doing, though, in terms of trying to provide support to other employers in the ACT is working with organisations like the Canberra Business Enterprise Centre to deliver mental health first aid training programs to the ACT business community. And we're doing that as a way of trying to increase people's knowledge of how to have these conversations, how to recognise when someone actually might be going through a crisis and needs some extra help, and to be able to do that connection that comes from a place of kindness and caring that will really help people. The other thing I could suggest is there's going to be a lot of people right now in the Canberra community who are probably feeling a little bit like Karen and maybe her partner Michael are feeling at the moment. I know that there's a lot of people in our Canberra community who are veterans who are looking at what's been happening in Afghanistan and have been finding that really hard to see in the news, and that's been bringing up a lot of things for people. And there's also going to be a lot of people who are returning to their workplace after a long period of working from home. And that's quite a transition to go through as well. So the more we can all just try and remember to be kind to each other, and to have empathy and to remember that you don't know what else someone else is dealing with at home, whether it's, you know, young children that are not able to go back to school yet, or a partner that might need some extra support, or other family members. You know, that will really help all of us to go through this transition back into working in the office again.
There's no template for this new world we're entering into post lockdown. We're finding our way, all of us, in whatever situations we're in. And I'll actually come back to that at a later point in this discussion. The mental health first aid courses that the Minister just mentioned, when we were younger, you could do the first aid course, but the mental health first aid courses are exceptional, interesting, and such a great way of starting a lot of these discussions in the workplace if you've never known how to or never felt comfortable to. Coming back to Karen. And actually, Minister, I was going to come, you've answered quite a lot of these already. I imagine in your day-to-day life, you're seeing many workplaces that are adapting. What kind of long-term solution or longer-term solutions for people like Karen or other people who might need a little bit of additional support or assistance in the workplace are you seeing that are effective in workplaces?
Yeah, I think it's really important to approach it at an individual level. You know, every person is going to have different needs, and I know that myself as a manager, when I've had to have these conversations with people that I'm managing in the past, the best way to approach it is to have an honest conversation with someone in a really informal setting where you can just relax and connect as human beings and say, look, what's actually going to help you to be able to manage your work best? And how can I best accommodate what's going on for you? Making sure that they know all of the supports that are available to them, and understanding what's going to work best for them as an individual is the best way to do it. There's a whole lot of resources that ACT government offers through the Healthier Work program that can assist employers in managing health and wellbeing and providing support to their employees. And so, you know, that can help you understand the mental health risks and issues in your own workplace. And every workplace is going to have something that they need to be mindful of and be addressing. It's just going to be different in different workplaces. And to better engage with your employees around mental health and wellbeing. So you can find those things at healthierwork.act.gov.au. And that can be a really useful place to start if you're looking for some resources.
Thank you, Minister. We talked at the very start about removing the stigma, and for many people, getting help for mental health matter, the fear is that they carry it as some kind of a record. And I have a question for Jane and for Dan as well, about what kind of records or tracking should a workplace keep of any interactions that they might have with Karen, for instance?
I have to say, I mean, I've had a number of staff that have had kind of serious mental health issues. I personally don't keep those records. I would not notify HR about them. That's a personal choice. If it goes into a formal process, well, then I'm not in charge of that. HR is. But I have to say, stigma is alive and well, as we all know. And I personally would not notify other staff, and particularly the HR department, unless there was a real reason that I had to disclose that. So that's my kind of approach, really. And probably I should be giving a completely different answer, but that is in fact what I would do.
Dan?
Yeah, from our point of view, what privacy obviously is a big thing, and we'd like to make sure that people that don't need to know about it don't find out about things. But we often do refer staff who are having issues to some of the organisations that are around set up to help. Obviously, we're in manufacturing, construction industry, a lot of young men especially who are obviously at a very high risk, I guess, category for mental health and suicide and things like that. And, you know, we've had our share of experiences with all of that with our staff. So it's something that, to answer the question, I guess, I keep a bit of a document of it. So I just like to, I find that things like this can go in waves a little bit. You know, everybody else on this panel are kind of experts in all of this mental health stuff, whereas I guess I'm sort of just trying to find my own way. So what I've found is that if people have an issue, you might help them address, you know, do what you can to help them out, and then they might be fine for a while, and then it might pop up again down the track. And look, when you're running a business, you got, you know, you have 1,000 things that you're doing, and over the course of 6 months, 12 months, however long it may be before somebody starts having issues again, or we start seeing warning signs again, a lot can happen, and it can be hard to keep track of. You know, I've got 70 odd staff. It's very difficult to keep track of where everyone's up to. So I do find that it's handy to have a few notes that just might say, you know, on this date, I had a chat to Karen, you know, seemed to be a few issues. We discussed this, and, you know, she was going to follow these steps, and, you know, whatever the outcome may have been. And that way I can always look back on that and sort of remind myself what happened. And then if I do need to have a chat to them again, just to see where they're up to, you know, I'm just more informed with where they were and what may be happening again. I just like to be prepared like that. I don't want to go and have a conversation that we've already had, almost not remembering having it with them before or something, you know?
Yep, and I think, Jane, both points are valid in this, but with people who move on in workplaces, etc., perhaps it's also a valuable, while maintaining the privacy aspect, way of recording the conversation should you need to address it at a later point. On that topic, does sorry, I've got a question in the question box for you, Dan, about some of the referrals, kind of businesses that you might refer people to.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a fair bit of work with OzHelp in the past. They sort of quite well tailored towards construction and obviously manufacturing industries like ours. They've actually come out to our workplace and put on barbecues and just had a bit of a chat on a few occasions. You know, if you put on a free feed, you generally get a pretty good turnout. So everyone sort of shows up and gets the information and the advice and the flyers. They're probably the main one. We got their posters all over our factory, and we also have their cards. I find one of the best things we do is just leave cards everywhere, stacks of cards, so people don't have to come up and say, hey, can I have a card for AusHelp? They can just pick one up, you know, when no one's looking, if that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
As far as other organisations, you know, I guess I'm not too sure, I guess, how to, without searching myself to go through and try to find organisations, I'm not too sure how to come across them, or how to seek help. That's why I think it's quite important that, you know, when we have a relationship with someone like AusHelp or MensLink or someone like that, that we use that relationship and use their resources. As far as I'm concerned, the people that we deal with largely at AusHelp, they have that information. They can advise if we should be talking to someone else or looking for resources here or sending someone here or whatever. Yeah, so I guess it's not so much about the range of resources that we use, but the relationship that we have with the ones that we do.
Perfect. Minister?
Yeah, one of the great things about the ACT is that we've got a really diverse range of organisations in our community who are working with people who all have quite different needs, and so there's likely to be an organisation out there for just about every situation. It's just a matter of finding the right organisation. You know, as Dan was saying, sometimes it can be hard to know where to go. But there really is a huge range. Soldier On and Open Arms do some fantastic work for veterans, for people in the workplace. There's some great resources at Mental Illness Education ACT for helping to manage stress and for running education and awareness. But also talking to AusHelp or talking to your union can be a really good way of getting people connected with the right services as well. Catholic Catholic Care and Marymead are doing some fantastic work with young people in our community, and we've also got COTA for older Canberrans, so that's the Council of the Ageing, and they can provide some great connections for people so that, you know, people aren't feeling like they're on their own in these situations. We've also got some great organisations that work with people who have chronic health conditions and disabilities. So if you're working with someone who's maybe returning to work after a long period away, then it can be useful to make sure that they know that organisations like Advocacy for Inclusion and ADICAS are there to help them if they're coming back after a long time out with a psychosocial injury or condition. So there really is a huge range, and Meridian as well for LGBTIQ people.
Let's turn our attention to Michael, Karen's husband. Michael's just returned from a tour of Afghanistan. He was involved in an ambush where his team took some mortar fire from insurgents, and his best friend in the unit was severely injured and close to death. Michael stayed with him to reassure him that he was going to be okay whilst the attack continued, and they waited to be airlifted back to base. Karen had their baby while Michael was away. Michael returned home and to his local base. Michael would usually have a beer with dinner, but in the weeks after his return, he started to have 2 or 3. He's having trouble sleeping with the baby still waking in the middle of the night, and sometimes while he's sleeping, he's yelling out his friend's name. Michael doesn't feel he is connected with the baby and is reluctant to help Karen out around the house. He hasn't spoken about his experiences while away and feels surges of anger after alcohol consumption. Questions for Beck and for Martin. Are these warning signs or what might be expected from somebody who's returning from a conflict such as this?
I was going to let you go first, Marty, because you haven't had a chance to say much. I guess for me, the first things that I was kind of, thinking about as we were hearing about Karen and Michael is that this family unit has got a huge amount of pressure and stress around them at the moment. And my initial thought was that I would be wanting to approach them as a family unit when I sort of became aware of their situation. The kinds of things that you've outlined for Michael are absolutely true of a lot of people that we see return. In this instance, Michael's trying to deal with obviously the decompression from coming back from operational service. He's had, deployment trauma while he's been there. He has also been separated from his family unit, and he wasn't there for the birth of his child. And you know, we can kind of assume maybe that this is the first child for the family unit, as there's been no mention of other kids. So he's sort of, you know, he's been disconnected from that experience of the family unit changing. We heard early on that Karen's mum looks after the baby 2 days a week, and I imagine, as is the case with lots of families, mum has probably been there providing that additional support to Karen while Michael's been away. And so on his return, he's got to try and find his place within this new family unit and what that responsibility looks like, plus decompress from his operational service, plus deal with, you know, just the change in environment from being in that very, you know, very uncertain, very volatile, very dangerous scenario to reintegrating back into the safety of his home environment. And it's not uncommon that people can use you know, alcohol as a way to kind of manage their stress. And so we've also got now a substance that's kind of also sitting there complicating matters. So there's so many different components to, you know, this particular presentation, not only of Michael, but of the family unit. And I'm pretty confident Marty's going to pick up on some of these things and add his thoughts. But I would absolutely be looking at each of those as meaning that this is a really sort of complex presentation for Michael and for Karen as well.
Thanks, Beck, and thanks, Jen. It's interesting when you talked about are these warning signs. I'm thinking, given what Michael has been through and is going through, I'm surprised that there are only those warning signs. As Beck said, he's come from an environment for which he's been trained all his life, and he's lived in that environment in Afghanistan. And then while he's been in Afghanistan, he's been dreaming of life back at home. But then he comes back home and it's nothing like that at all. You know, having kids is difficult at the best of times, but coming home from this war zone to a baby, his wife is going to be clearly preoccupied. You know, even if we hadn't had the discussion about Karen, you know, a new mother is you know, has to be preoccupied with a baby. There's lack of sleep. There's also the challenge of coming. One of the things that we've seen with people coming back, not only from a war zone, but also maybe emergency services or the RFS or the SES or things like that, is they live in an environment that's around a crisis. And in that environment, they have an incredible sense of purpose, and they have an incredible sense of teamwork and camaraderie. Now, while the crisis is really, really difficult and stressful, they're holding it together because they've got their team around them and they've got a massive sense of purpose. We then take Michael away from all of that. He's grieving the loss of one of his teammates who's dead, and then he's coming into an environment where everything else is at sea. So he's lost that structure in his life that the army provides and his teammates provide, and he's lost that sense of purpose. And you know, I'm surprised he's getting through it all. And it's interesting. One of our volunteers who is a senior army officer who has done multiple deployments in war zones and other areas. And he said, it's interesting, in the old days, you used to not say anything when you came back from a war zone because of the stigma of saying, look, I'm not coping. He said now the army, and I'm presuming the other services, if you don't talk, that tends to indicate that you've got an issue. So I believe, I'm not an expert, Beck, this would be more your field, but I believe that the services are much better, and Veterans Affairs much better at helping people make that transition from structure, teamwork, camaraderie, and purpose to a civilian life where you can get all those things, but it's quite different.
Heading into Michael's workspace, and this is a question for Josh. Michael's work performance and concentration has been noticed to have diminished by his peers and superiors. How might this be approached in the workplace with Michael?
There's absolutely a responsibility to address what's happening with Michael. I think it's done in a supportive. I know it should be done in a supportive way, and again, maintaining that there's a level of confidentiality and privacy. But just sort of tying that up with earlier comments too, I think there really is the necessity to make sure that this is addressed, but it's also documented appropriately, because in our space, particularly working with mental health, you have to capture patterns of behaviour, and it's really, really important to be able to document conversations, time spent where you've tried to support and individualise the supports, but really important that there's acknowledgement that there is a noticeable decrease in his presentation at work, his workplace performance. Then I think it is the responsibility that a person takes charge of that, who has a relationship with Michael, hopefully would have a level of training support in the background to help foster those really important and courageous conversations that need to take place. But Michael may not acknowledge that in the early stages of those conversations, but would absolutely feel through time that that is a support, and that is an attempt to make sure that everything is done in his best interests. I mean, we know it's interesting about this population of people we're talking about, and a real life experience for me only happened this weekend, to share very quickly. Because of the relaxing of some of the lockdown things in Canberra, I was able to catch up with two very close mates. One of those mates, his father is a Vietnam veteran, and he actually is, there is acknowledgement of a 50-year anniversary coming up this year about a significant event that happened during the Vietnam War, of what my good friend's father was involved in. He's been undergoing clinical support for 8 to 10 years now. He's had a family. He's had a lot of people invested in his life and supports. And it's only been the last 6 months where he's really started to unpack and feel comfortable to talk about this involvement and the trauma and everything. And everyone around him has acknowledged that, you know, he has been very unwell for a very long time. And statistics tell us, like on average now, we know that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men, I think this is internationally, will experience an anxiety disorder in their life. So this is a real life thing. But for Michael, in a workplace context, it is essential to have the courageous conversations with him, again, supported, but to find out what he needs and get him talking through presence and through involvement, get him talking about what he needs. He may not know what he needs, but that's the skill and the training of the person or the people involved to try and get to the detail where he needs to be.
I really like the words about the courageous conversations and the persistence. You don't just ask once, you have to keep asking the questions. And in this particular hypothetical scenario, I've given you the backgrounds to both Karen and Michael, which even as a friend or as a work colleague, you don't get presented with. You're presented with the person who you can see is going through something, but not necessarily the background story. And staying with Michael for just a moment, and again for Josh and for Martin, Michael's work and beer mates know something's wrong, but they don't know how to approach the conversation. For both of you, what are some starting points?
I think we know that a lot of mental health presentations at work are around change. So somebody who used to be like this and is no longer. And I think, you know, one of the things when we do mental health presentations in workplaces or online, we talk to people about identifying those changes, not making a big deal of it, but just, you know, hey, I noticed that you're not going out socially with work anymore, or you're really quiet, or you're not eating, or you're, you know, whatever it is, and just saying, is there something going on? I think, and I forget who the speaker was, it might have been Zeb, it's not our job either as managers or as peer workers to be able to fix the problem. It's just able to have that conversation, listen without judgment, and encourage them to go to a place where they can get more support. And it might be ad hoc support from other friends and family. It might be semi-professional support, or it might be, you know, they need to go to a psychologist or even a psychiatrist. One of the things I do know as a manager is having a conversation about work. We've noticed some changes. You know, you may or may not be going through a hard time, and you may or may not want to tell me as your boss about that. That's okay. But is there anything at work that's causing you additional stress? And the things that we try and look at are either changing the workload, so the amount of work that a person's facing, or the work type. Now, this isn't necessarily, you know, letting employees off the things they don't like. Otherwise, I wouldn't be writing our annual report today. But it is looking at, you know, are there certain aspects of your work that we could change to reduce levels of anxiety and stress?
Sorry, Minister and Beck, I've seen you. Josh, did you want to say anything towards this?
I was just, look, again, I think, I know Martin is bang on here, and it's about your authenticity. People see through that shit immediately if you're not authentic. And by asking the questions and showing a genuine interest in a person's life, framed in a supportive way, that will happen. And you are present, you are available, but you are authentic. Working with kids, they see through this. If you're not authentic and if you don't do what you say you're going to do, you lose that relationship so quickly. And it's the same with adults. You just have to be real, and you have to be genuinely interested in supporting the person for that relationship to bring about these courageous conversations.
Minister?
Yeah, look, this one, they're both absolutely right. If you're genuinely looking for ways to kindly and gently connect with and support someone at work, then that's going to be the best approach. As it so happens, I'm also the Minister responsible for veterans in the ACT as well as mental health. And during the first half of the 2000s, I worked at Navy and worked with a lot of guys that were posting back in after having been in Afghanistan or Iraq. And I felt that while we were at Navy, that there was a lot of ready support available. They were surrounded by people who'd been through similar experiences. And so having those conversations was a very natural thing for a lot of people to be able to do. They were in an environment where that came much more easily. I know that if you were someone who was working in the ACT public service, having paid off from service in our armed forces, then that might not come quite as easily because you're surrounded by people who have quite diverse life experiences and may not necessarily understand at a deep personal level everything that you've experienced, but they're still going to care about you as a human being, and they're still going to notice if things are not going well, and hopefully we'll sit you down and say, hey, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to support you? Do you have people you can talk to? But I guess this is also why we have a veterans employment strategy for the ACT public service, and a real focus on networking and information sharing and helping people to connect with each other. We know that we do have hundreds of people in our ACT public service who are veterans, and so it's really important that we make sure that we're able to provide good working opportunities to people in the public service, and understand where they're coming from and what they might be going through as well, and able to support them if they need to attend to some other things that are going on in their life. So that is something that we look out for in our own employment opportunities.
Beck?
Yeah, I was just going to add one of the things that was a really powerful piece of research that kind of informed my approach early in my psychologist career was that 85% of the effect that you have is because of the relationship that you have with the other person. It's irrespective of whether you're a specialist in whatever kind of strategy or toolbox that you might have, which is why even going and sitting at the hairdresser can be such a powerful experience, because it's another human being sitting there having a conversation with you who you build a trusted relationship with over time. And so that always, I remind myself of that when I need some grounding, that, it's not necessarily the expertise and the credentials, it's actually the human to human experience, which is really powerful. And I think, when you share that across a workplace and people understand they actually have a huge degree of power just in being another human being who you can have a relationship with, then that's really empowering for colleagues and for managers and for leaders in teams. The other thing is that we know that 50% of somebody's mental health and wellbeing is determined by relationships. And again, that kind of echoes everything that the panel has said around the importance of having those conversations, genuine care, being interested, being curious about the people that you're working with, is such a powerful thing. And if we notice that people are isolating themselves, or if we notice that they are appearing to be disconnected or disconnecting themselves, that it's really important that we bring them back in to their sort of community, whether that's their workplace community or their social community, and give them the opportunity to feel connected and to feel part of a community. And I guess the third thing, just with my soldier on hat on, that we've recognised is that, our tagline is that it's about supporting, serving and ex-serving servicemen and women and their families. And it's really that, ensuring that, we're treating people as a whole, and that includes their family unit. And so some of the initiatives that Soldier On now has around, walking groups for partners, particularly someone like Karen who's got a young baby, that they can go out on a Wednesday morning and they can walk with other mums who have service partners, and they can talk about and share those experiences, is really powerful. And then bringing families together and having those sort of opportunities to have barbecues and build a community. Canberra's really good at that. But, for service people, and Karen and Michael have probably moved around the country a fair bit. So any organisation which gives them an opportunity to build a community around them and to be able to have those conversations with other caring individuals who share some of that common experience is going to be really crucial to these guys having a successful, happy future.
Zeb, I know you've got a contribution to this too, but I have a question for you ahead of your contribution. I find it interesting myself, have been married 20 years now, and I think you get to a point in your relationship where your friends and your work colleagues ask how you are, ask how the kids are, ask how work is, but they don't ever ask, how's the marriage, how's the relationship going? And in this instance with Karen and with Michael, what options are there for the couple to seek support together, and how could you bring this topic up in a way that's safe for both Karen and Michael without feeling like it's a daunting way of approaching it?
Yeah, look, with all the changes that are occurring and all the, I guess, the stresses around Karen and Michael right now, why would their relationship not be affected? Right? It must be affected. And when you're in a relationship yourself, you would assume that. So, as a friend, I'd be saying, man, that must be hard. How are you managing being a mum and trying to be there for your hubby as well? That's got to be hard. I would struggle with something like that. And I feel that that's asking about the relationship without trying to be nosy, right? That's kind of being a caring friend. What I was going to say kind of touches on this as well, which is that I really love the quote, be the change you want to see in the world. And if you yourself are in a management position, or even just in the workplace, if you are okay of sending an email out to your boss or whoever it is, or even when everyone's included, and say, hi guys, just had a really off weekend, feeling anxious, just not going to be at work tomorrow. I'll be back on Tuesday, hopefully. Just saying that and reading that from someone, it can be really powerful, because what it's saying is that, here's my permission for anyone in the workplace to model my behavior. Because if it's okay for the boss to do that, surely everyone else can say, okay, well, he's kind of saying that that's okay, or she's kind of saying that this is allowed. So why should I not take a page out of that supervisor or that team leader's book and also open up? It's like Josh was saying, it's that courageous conversation. But even without going into the conversation, if you're there able to say, hey, just not feeling the best mentally, actually saying mentally, not saying I've got a cold and not trying to put another spin on it, actually really is powerful for other people in the workplace. For myself in the workplace, I work with a bunch of doctors and nurses and physiotherapists. It's a huge team. And I will actually, say, guys, it was just a really heavy week last week. I'm just not going to come in on Monday. And they'll check in with me on Tuesday. But I'm trying to promote mental health, right? I'm trying to say it's okay. So I need to be there saying, not, out loud talking about my issues if I don't want to, but at least telling people that this is a thing. Here I am as a psychologist saying that I don't always have it 100% put together, and that's okay, because it's impossible not to have it 100% always put together.
I have a quote on a similar line that I got from a counsellor around how can you tend someone else's garden if your own garden's untended? And I thought that was a really good way of putting it. So we're all talking about this via a Zoom, not face-to-face. The energy we're getting off each other is literally what we can see on a screen. And this is now work normal for many people, that's their day-to-day interaction with their boss, is the 10 a.m. check-in via Zoom. I thought that I'd put this question out to everybody, because this is now a commonality. As we return to this new work post-lockdown, what signs should we look for in a staff member who might be struggling and working from home?
Can I just jump in? Because I'm already on. Screen off. If they've suddenly got their screen off, that might be a small indication.
Any other thoughts or experiences?
I think one of the things, I worked with a few teams last year as they were sort of coming back to work after our 2020 lockdown period. And one of the things that we sort of learned from that experience, and in working with a lot of those managers and leaders this year, they're really attuned to and mindful of, is you don't want to create two teams within a team. So as you start to have people returning to work, and you've got those who are on the ground physically present in the workplace, and then you have people who are still working remotely as they're managing their different family dynamics and personal circumstances, they return, and you almost feel like you've got two teams now, where you've got some that feel as though for whatever reason they're not as connected because they couldn't return on time, or there's any kind of animosity or any kind of resistance within there about we've been here doing the hard yards while you've been at home relaxing, all of those kinds of things. And so one of the things that I think is really important to keep an ear out for in the workplace is any kind of water cooler conversations or anything which suggests that those who haven't returned to work yet are not pulling their weight, and just be really mindful of not having kind of multiple teams within teams is probably something I would sort of suggest to be mindful of.
And as a final question, as we've all adjusted to these new ways of doing work and life interactions, in general, what are some of the practices of healthy and happy workplaces in our new post-pandemic world?
I think, Jen, from our perspective, the teamwork of being back in the office is critical, particularly when we do deal with such troublesome issues. And I was on another online forum with Headspace and other organisations recently, and we all said how important it was to have people back in the office to get that peer support when dealing with troublesome situations. But the other thing I think that's really important is flexibility. We've got some staff back to work full time. Some staff have said, look, I want to work a day or two from home, and all of those things I think are just part of managing. So, you know, just being flexible, I think, is important.
Anyone else?
Yeah, if I can jump in, something that we've always been big on, and especially now after lockdown and things like that, we're a manufacturing business, so it's hard for people to work from home, obviously, but it's just social events. We love our social events. We do as much as we can. Last Friday of every month, we put on a barbecue, you know, a bit of a toolbox talk, address any issues, but then everyone hangs around. We put on a big barbecue. We've just booked a little Melbourne Cup function at the footy club next door. We put on some platters, knock off a bit early, everyone heads there, and has something to eat, has something to drink. We've done go-karting, axe throwing, all kinds of things, poker things. We just try to do, just provide things. We understand a lot of people, you know, aren't interested. It's just not their thing. We get that. It's not compulsory or anything like that, but I think it does a couple of things that I've found. One, it just lets people unwind a little bit and, you know, I guess just enjoy themselves, which, you know, sometimes you can be in a situation where you're at work and it's stressful, you've got a lot on, you're under the pump, and then you get home and you heard a few hypotheticals about just some of the kind of situations people can be in and dealing with at home. So just to have that release of half an hour where you can, just relax, have a chat, can go a long way. And the other thing it does is I just find it builds relationships so much better. Different workplaces are obviously quite different. In a manufacturing environment like ours, it's, you know, you quite go and go and go. You've got, you know, we've got targets we have to meet. There's things that you've got to do. So it's nice just to be able to stop and sit down and have a chat and get to know, and, you know, I guess just strengthen personal relationships with people that you work with. And look, that makes work more enjoyable, but it also does give people the confidence that if they are having issues or something along those lines, they're a lot more confident sharing with somebody, not just somebody that they've worked next to for 10 years, but somebody that worked next to for 10 years, but then have that slightly stronger personal relationship, that bit of trust, that bit of knowledge of each other, I guess.
Jane?
Oh, sounds like a fantastic workplace, Dan. I want to come and work for you, actually.
We're taking applications at the moment, so
we'll be there Friday night.
I totally agree with you, Dan. I think there's been a real emphasis in my workplace, actually. It's changed from being totally about the task to actually looking behind the task and looking at the people. So we've now got this monthly online trivia that we do, and we do it in a small breakout group. So you get to talk more closely with that smaller group, and it's usually those small groups change every time. So you spend more time with people that you may not necessarily work with. So yeah, I'd say my workplace has now, as you've identified, become more focused on the social. And it's quite a big change, really, from it always being task. So that is a COVID change that I can certainly see.
Marty, I understand you have to leave us shortly. So any final words before you head off?
No, just don't work Sundays. It's not very healthy.
Thank you for being with us on a Sunday. It's much appreciated.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everybody. It's been great chatting with you. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye.
I don't know if anyone else has anything further to say on this, but one of the things for myself, and I appreciate this isn't the same for every workplace, but we are a particularly joyful workplace, actually, and my on-air colleague who I spend many hours with in the company of every day, when we met 3 years ago at a challenging point in both of our lives, we, at the end of every Friday, the last thing we did before we went home was we gave each other a hug. And when we went to COVID, where we weren't supposed to touch each other, we stopped. And when we could again, the first lockdown, we had missed it so much. It was just for us, the way we wrapped up the week, put things aside, and then moved on to the fresh new week. So that's for me one of the happy, healthy signs of our workplace, was that connection that's just beyond my work colleague. He's my friend as well.
I was just going to offer, Jen, one of the things that I think that I've seen across my sort of military counterpart clients is, and that sort of community, is an acceptance that we've now had a bit of an insight into people's lives, you know, out of work, because we have literally been beamed into people's lounge rooms, kitchens, you know, and it was funny, I think, when we first started working like that at the beginning, and I'm working with these very senior military officers who are trying to have everything very formal, and they're in their library with their bookcase behind them. And now, you know, it's not uncommon that they'll be in the kitchen and they'll be trying to sort out the kids' remote learning, and they'll be doing something else. And then, you know, there's this tag teaming going on in households. And I think what that's done, and I know because I've had conversations with them, it's allowed a real look at people as a whole person and all of the things that go on behind them, and not just the facade that we see at work. So I really hope that that continues. And I'd say it's probably the same across many different professions and many different workplaces, but that we do continue to appreciate, you know, people's entire lives. And I think that that's really good. I think it helps with that relationship building that we were talking about before.
Thank you, Josh, Martin, Beck, Zeb, Dan, Emma, Jane, and Tim for moderating this conversation. It's been a fun, insightful, and thoughtful reflection on workplace and mental health.